My sister's wedding invitation came with a shocking condition: I had to decline. A few weeks ago, I got a save the date card in the mail for my sister Jane's wedding. I won't lie. I was happy for her. She's 28, and we've always been close. At least we were until she started dating Evan. I tried to get along with him, but something about him always felt off. He has this way of talking over people, making decisions for Jane, and generally acting like he's in charge of everything. I figured it was just his personality, but over time, it started to affect our family. Jane and I used to hang out all the time. But once she got serious with Evan, she became harder to reach. It was like he had a say in when and how she could see people. Even when we did meet up, he was either there or texting her constantly. My parents noticed it too, but they chalked it up to relationship stuff. So when I heard they were engaged, I was happy for her. But I also had a sinking feeling that things were only going to get worse. Then the actual wedding invitation came, and that's when everything started going off the rails. First, it wasn't just an invitation. It was basically a contract. The wedding was going to be a destination event at a luxury resort in Italy. Beautiful place, sure. But the catch? Every guest had to pay their own way, and it wasn't just flights and hotels. They had a whole wedding experience package that cost over $3,000 per person. It included things like a welcome dinner, a spa day with the groom's party mandatory for groomsmen, a yacht excursion, and a private farewell brunch. And, of course, attendance at all these events was required. I assumed it was a suggestion, but the wording was clear. If you didn't pay for the full experience, you weren't invited to the ceremony. I thought my parents would be just as shocked as I was, but they were surprisingly calm about it. My mom said it was a lot, but it was Jane's big day, and they wanted to be supportive. My dad just muttered something about how weddings are getting ridiculous these days, but even they weren't totally against it. Extended family, though, different story. As soon as the invitation started going out, our family group chat blew up. Some cousins and aunts were already saying they wouldn't go because of the cost. Then I saw the part that made my jaw drop: the NDA. Buried in the invitation was a section that said all guests had to sign a non-disclosure agreement to attend. Apparently, Evan had gotten the idea from another influencer's wedding, a high-profile event where guests weren't allowed to post anything that wasn't pre-approved. He had convinced himself that their wedding needed the same level of exclusivity even though no one attending was actually famous. The NDA specifically said guests weren't allowed to post anything online, discuss any issues about the wedding, or mention the costs at all. Violating the NDA, it warned, could result in legal action. At first, I thought this was a joke, but nope, it was real. Jane confirmed it when I asked her. She said it was just a precaution and that Evan was really serious about protecting his brand. I asked if she was okay with this, and she just shrugged, saying it was what Evan wanted. The more I read the invite, the worse it got. Groomsmen had to wear custom suits from a specific designer which they had to buy themselves, and the bridesmaids had their own strict dress code. The itinerary was packed with pre-wedding events, and none of them were optional. The family group chat turned into a war zone. Some of my cousins flat out refused to go. My uncle called it the most entitled thing he'd ever seen. A few relatives were trying to keep the peace, but it was obvious that a lot of people were backing out. My parents weren't happy about the drama, but still wanted to go. My mom asked me to just sign the NDA and go for Jane's sake, but I couldn't get past how ridiculous it all was. It wasn't just about the money, it was the control. The way Evan was dictating every detail, even what people could say about the wedding, was too much. I sat with it for a few days, debating whether to go. But in the end, I decided I couldn't do it. I called Jane and told her I wasn't coming. She didn't take it well. At first, she just sounded disappointed. Then she asked if I could at least reconsider. I told her I loved her, but I wasn't comfortable with everything they were asking. She got quiet for a long time before finally saying, "Okay. If that's how you feel," but even as she said it, I could tell it wasn't over. She wasn't arguing yet, but I knew my sister, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. An hour later, I got a text from Evan. It was long, passive-aggressive, and full of guilt-tripping. He said he was heartbroken that I was making this about myself instead of supporting my sister. He said it wasn't that hard to just sign a piece of paper and show up. Then he ended it with, "I hope one day you understand what it means to truly support family." I left him on read. More relatives started dropping out, and the group chat exploded again. Someone sent a screenshot of a groomsman backing out because of the costs. Another cousin said they weren't signing an NDA for any wedding. A few family members were still going, but it was obvious that a lot of people were over it. My mom called again saying Jane was upset. She asked if I could just go to keep the peace. I told her I had made my decision. She sighed, but didn't push it. Jane hasn't texted me since. I have no idea if she's actually mad or if Evan just told her to ignore me. Either way, I have a bad feeling that this is only the beginning. The morning after I told Jane I wasn't coming to the wedding, I woke up to a missed call from her, then another and another. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, a long text. She was hurt, disappointed, and asking if I would reconsider. She didn't understand why I was making such a big deal out of it. She said it was just an NDA and that she and Evan had put so much effort into planning this wedding. She wanted me there. Before I could even think of how to respond, another message popped up. This one was from Evan. It was long and passive-aggressive. He talked about how he'd welcomed me into his life, how he thought I was better than this, and how he never expected me to be the kind of person who abandons family over something so small. He said the NDA was just a formality, that plenty of people signed contracts for events, and that it was unfair that I was making Jane suffer just because I didn't like the rules. He ended it by saying that he was so disappointed, but that he hoped I would rethink my priorities before it's too late. I put my phone down before I even had time to process all that. My parents called. My mom sounded tired, like she had been up all night thinking about this. She told me that Jane was really upset and that the wedding was a huge deal for her. My dad wasn't saying much in the background, but I could tell he wasn't thrilled about the drama either. My mom asked me to just sign the NDA and come to the wedding. For Jane's sake, I told her I wasn't going. Silence. Then a sigh. She didn't argue, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice. By midday, the family group chat had turned into a disaster zone. More people were backing out. A cousin posted a message saying they loved Jane, but they weren't spending thousands of dollars on a trip just to follow a bunch of strict rules. Someone else chimed in saying they didn't appreciate being told what they could and couldn't post online. One of my aunts, who is usually the peacekeeper, tried to calm everyone down, but it wasn't working. The chat kept blowing up, then Evan joined in. He sent a long angry message about how this was supposed to be the happiest time of his and Jane's lives and how it was disgusting that people were making it about themselves. He accused certain family members, no names, but it was clear he was talking about me, of starting drama and ruining their special moment. He ended it by saying that real family supports each other no matter what. More people left the chat. Jane called again that night. This time, she wasn't just disappointed. She sounded exhausted. She told me that Evan was beyond stressed, and all this drama was only making it worse. She didn't get why I was making this so difficult. She asked if I could just sign the NDA and come for her, not for Evan. I told her no. The call ended shortly after that. By the next morning, even more guests had dropped out. A cousin sent me a message saying she had privately told Jane she wasn't coming either. Apparently, she didn't take it well. People were backing out left and right, and it was starting to get to her. At that point, I was frustrated, so I did something I don't normally do. I vented on Reddit. I didn't use real names or locations, but I laid out the situation, the expensive wedding, the NDA, the fallout with Jane. I hit post and didn't think much of it. Then it blew up. By that evening, the post had thousands of upvotes. People were commenting nonstop, calling the NDA ridiculous, and saying Evan sounded controlling. Some said I should be glad I wasn't going. Others called the whole wedding a cash grab. There were even a few people who shared similar experiences. Weddings with insane demands. Groomzillas who pushed family away. Then the private messages started rolling in. A few distant relatives I hadn't talked to in years reached out. Some had seen the post. Some had just heard about the drama through the family. They all had the same thing to say. This whole wedding was out of control, and they were glad someone was standing their ground. But Evan wasn't done. That night, he sent another message. This time, he wasn't pretending to be nice. He accused me of always being against him, of never supporting Jane, of trying to tear them apart. He said I had no idea what it was like to plan a wedding of this scale, and that I was being selfish by refusing to just go along with it. I ignored it. Then my mom called again. She told me Jane had stopped responding to her texts. She wasn't talking to her, my dad, or anyone else who had backed out. She sounded worried. Later, one of my uncles, one of the few people who had actually RSVP'd yes, called me. He said I did the right thing, that this whole thing was a mess, and that Jane was probably too deep into it to see how bad it was. Jane still hadn't replied to my last message. I didn't know if this was going to blow over or if I had just lost my sister over a wedding. But one thing was clear, this was far from over. A few days after my last update, things went from bad to worse. More people started dropping out of Jane and Evan's wedding. At first, it was just a few cousins and distant relatives. Then, one of Evan's groomsmen backed out. He had originally agreed to be part of the groom's party, but couldn't justify the cost anymore. That seemed to open the floodgates. By the end of the week, the guest list had shrunk dramatically. The family group chat was practically dead, except for the occasional message from my mom asking people to just do what's best for Jane. A few people still planned to go, but it was clear that the wedding wasn't going to be the grand over-the-top event Evan had envisioned. Then my mom called. Again, Jane wasn't doing well. She had stopped talking to a lot of people, including some of our relatives who had always been supportive of her. My mom was worried. She said she seemed stressed and had even mentioned canceling the wedding. I asked if she was serious or if it was just something she said in frustration, but she wasn't sure. Then later that night, I got a message from a cousin. It was a screenshot of a conversation in a private wedding group chat. Evan was losing it. In the messages, he was going off about how certain people me had ruined everything. He was furious that so many guests were dropping out and even angrier that people weren't taking his wedding seriously. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. If people aren't going to support us, then maybe there's no point in having this wedding at all. I didn't even have time to process that before I got a message from Jane. It was long. She was desperate. She said Evan was rethinking the entire wedding because of how many people were backing out. She begged me to reconsider, saying that if I showed up, it might make other people change their minds too. She said she didn't want to lose more people, that it was tearing Evan apart, and that he was devastated. I asked if he would drop the NDA. If that was the issue, I'd come. Silence. A few minutes later, she replied, Evan refused to drop the NDA. That was it for me. I told her my stance hadn't changed. If he wasn't willing to compromise, then neither was I. A few hours later, another cousin sent me more screenshots from the wedding chat. Evan had trashed me again, saying I had always hated him and had never supported Jane's happiness. He even hinted that I was jealous of their relationship. At that point, I couldn't stay silent. I called Jane. I asked if she had seen what Evan was saying about me. She had, and she still defended him. She said he was just venting and that he was under a lot of stress. I told her it wasn't just about me anymore. He was bad-mouthing half the family at this point. She had no response. Then my dad pulled me aside later that night. He told me he thought the whole thing was ridiculous too, but he didn't want to take sides. He just wanted Jane to be happy even if it meant going along with Evan's insane demands. Meanwhile, Evan was unraveling. At first, he kept up the act, playing it cool, pretending it didn't bother him. But as more guests backed out, the cracks started to show. A cousin who was originally supposed to be one of his groomsmen told me that Evan had snapped when another guest backed out. At first, he was just venting, but then he got frustrated, accusing people of sabotaging his wedding. What started as a few harsh words turned into a full-on breakdown, crying, pacing, and blaming everyone but himself. He even accused Jane's family of trying to sabotage the wedding. It wasn't just the guests backing out either. The vendors started dropping too. A florist backed out claiming there were payment issues. Then, a caterer allegedly canceled because Evan's family was late on payments. At this point, even the guests who were still planning to go started questioning if this wedding was even happening. Then in a last-ditch effort, Jane messaged me again. She offered to pay for everything, my flights, my hotel, my entire wedding experience package. She just wanted me there, but the NDA still stood. I refused. She told me I was going to regret this, that this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and that I'd be missing out on one of the most important days of her life. Then Evan blocked me. I checked Instagram later that night, and I was completely blocked from his account. No mutual friends, no wedding updates, nothing. I wasn't even surprised at that point. The family was still divided. Some people thought I should just suck it up and go for Jane's sake. Others told me I was absolutely doing the right thing. The group chat was dead. My parents were stressed, and Jane was barely talking to anyone. Then the rumors started. A cousin called me saying they had heard from someone close to Evan that the wedding was either going to be downsized or postponed. They couldn't afford the original plan anymore. And with so many guests backing out, it was no longer the dream wedding Evan wanted. I haven't heard from Jane since. At this point, I have no idea what's going to happen. But if Evan is really reconsidering the wedding, then maybe, just maybe, Jane is starting to see the cracks too. A week after everything started falling apart, a cousin who had backed out of the wedding called me. He had some serious tea. Apparently, at one of Evan's last remaining groom events, he lost it in front of a few of the groomsmen. He wasn't just upset. He was furious about the guest list shrinking. He started ranting about how if people didn't want to support their love, then maybe he and Jane should just elope instead. The cousin who overheard it wasn't sure if he was serious or just trying to make a point, but either way, it wasn't a great sign. Then 2 days later, I got another call, this time from my mom. Jane had broken down. She wasn't just upset. She had a full-on meltdown in front of my parents. She told them she felt trapped. She wanted this wedding to go smoothly, but with so many people backing out, Evan had been putting all the pressure on her. She felt like she was caught in the middle, trying to please him while watching her family pull away. For the first time, my mom admitted she thought Evan was being unreasonable. Up until now, she had been trying to keep the peace, but after seeing Jane like that, she finally saw how much stress this whole situation was putting on her. Then the rumors started flying. One of my aunts, who was still invited, heard from another guest that Evan was thinking about canceling the wedding altogether. Apparently, he had told one of his friends that if enough people weren't going to be there, then it wasn't worth having the wedding at all. It wasn't just guests dropping either. More vendors started bailing. First, the venue had issues with late payments from Evan's family, then another caterer pulled out. It was like a domino effect. One thing after another kept going wrong. That's when my parents finally decided to step in. My dad sat Jane down and tried to talk to her about the situation. He didn't push too hard, but he made it clear that he was worried about how much control Evan had over everything. My mom, now fully on board with the "this wedding is a disaster" mindset, told Jane that if things were this hard before the marriage even started, maybe she should take a step back and think about what she was getting into. I wasn't involved in that conversation, but I heard about it later. And apparently, for the first time, Jane actually listened. Meanwhile, Evan was still trying to salvage what was left. He sent out a massive email to the remaining guests. It was basically a long dramatic guilt trip about how important this wedding was and how he and Jane had worked so hard to plan the perfect day. He wrote about how they were so hurt by the people who backed out and how they hoped that the people who truly cared about them would still show up. I stayed out of it. I wasn't going to argue with him or try to convince Jane of anything. At this point, she had all the information she needed. Then out of nowhere, Jane called me. It had been a while since we talked, and this time, she sounded different. She told me that for the first time, she was starting to feel like maybe something was wrong. She didn't say much, but I could tell she was really conflicted. Then the final blow, Evan gave her an ultimatum. He told her that if she couldn't fully commit to him, meaning choosing him over her family, then they needed to rethink everything. Jane didn't respond right away. Instead, she sat with it, thought about everything. Days passed, and for the first time, she started admitting things to herself, how she felt trapped, how she had ignored the warning signs, how Evan's demands had worn her down. And then, finally, she made her decision. She called off the wedding. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no big fight, no screaming match. She just walked away. Evan lost his mind. He started publicly trashing Jane and our family. He made vague but obvious social media posts about how he had wasted years on someone who didn't deserve him. He hinted that Jane had betrayed him and that he had been surrounded by toxic people the whole time. Then he moved out. Jane left their shared apartment and went to stay with our parents. She didn't say much, just that she needed time to figure things out. At this point, the wedding that was supposed to be the event of the year was officially dead. No one was talking about the NDA anymore. No one was booking flights or planning outfits. It was over. I still don't know what's next for Jane, but for the first time in years, it feels like I have my sister back. 2 days after Jane called off the wedding, I got a simple text from her. It's officially cancelled. That was it. No long explanation. No details. Just 3 words. The first thing I did was check social media. Evan hadn't said anything yet, but I knew that wouldn't last long. Sure enough, by the end of the day, he had started posting vague, passive-aggressive messages. Sometimes you think you know someone, and then they show their true colors. Toxic people will always try to bring you down when they see you shining. At least I know who was really on my side all along. It didn't take a genius to figure out who he was talking about. The comment section was full of his followers hyping him up, telling him he deserved better, that he was too good for her anyway. A few mutual acquaintances liked the posts, but most people stayed quiet. Meanwhile, my parents, while still technically sad that the wedding didn't happen, were also relieved. My mom finally admitted that she had been worried about how controlling Evan was. My dad, usually the quiet one, just muttered something about how it was never going to work anyway. Then word started spreading that Evan's family was furious. I heard from a cousin that Evan's parents were livid about all the money they had spent on wedding preparations. They had put down deposits, booked vendors, and even started paying for certain exclusive add-ons Evan wanted. And now it was all gone. Then the vendors started demanding final payments. The florist and the caterer who had already backed out before the wedding even got cancelled were still owed money. Evan's parents had made partial payments but had been dragging their feet on the final invoices. Now that the wedding was cancelled, they were trying to claim that they shouldn't have to pay the remaining balance, but the contract said otherwise. Vendors started sending legal notices demanding payment. One even threatened to take them to small claims court if they didn't settle their bill. The vendors weren't having it. I don't know all the legal details, but from what I heard, at least one of them was threatening to take them to court if they didn't pay up. Jane, meanwhile, moved back home. She didn't say much at first, just that she needed some space to figure things out. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. My parents gave her room to breathe, but I could tell they were happy to have her back. Then for the first time in years, Jane finally opened up. It started small, a comment here, a passing remark there. Then one night, she just started talking. She told me how for the longest time she had convinced herself that Evan was just strong-willed, that he wasn't controlling. He just knew what he wanted. But the more she talked, the more it became clear. He never really listened to her at all. He planned the wedding without her. She had barely been consulted on the big decisions, where it would be, how long the trip was, who was invited. She hadn't even wanted a destination wedding in Italy. She just went along with it because it was easier than arguing. Then a cousin who was supposed to be in the groom's party spilled some more wedding secrets. Apparently, Evan had made a list of people he didn't want at the wedding, including some of Jane's childhood friends and even a couple of family members. He never told Jane. He just quietly didn't invite them and assumed she wouldn't notice. It was like with every new thing Jane learned, she saw more and more of the red flags that had been there all along. Then Evan went nuclear. He started telling people that Jane owed him compensation for wasting his time. He told mutual friends that he had spent years building a future with her, and now she was just throwing it all away. He even hinted that she should pay him back for all the money his family had spent on the wedding. Then he started privately messaging some of our relatives. He told them that Jane had betrayed him, that our family had bullied him, and that we had all been against him from the start. But by this point, people weren't buying it. The whole situation had gotten too big. Too many people had seen the real Evan during the wedding drama. That's when my parents, who had always tried to stay neutral, finally took a stand. My mom, who had spent so long trying to get me to sign the NDA, publicly told the family that she fully supported Jane's decision to walk away. My dad even reached out to some of the relatives Evan had tried to turn against us and set the record straight. Jane was still struggling, but she was starting to heal. I convinced her to see a therapist. At first, she wasn't sure, but then she admitted that she needed help processing everything. The moment she agreed, I knew she was actually serious about moving forward. Meanwhile, Evan's friends started turning on him. Some of the groomsmen who had originally backed him up started distancing themselves. A few of them had lost money because of the wedding too. And once they saw how he was blaming everyone but himself, they started cutting ties. Then Jane did something I hadn't seen her do in years. She started reconnecting with old friends. People she had lost touch with during her relationship with Evan started reaching out. She actually went out for the first time in weeks just to grab a drink and catch up. It was like watching someone slowly come back to life after being trapped in a fog for years. And the best part, Jane and I actually started spending time together again. We hadn't been close in so long, but now it felt like I finally had my sister back. The wedding had been officially cancelled for over a week, but Evan wasn't done, not even close. His social media became a messy passive-aggressive disaster. He started posting cryptic captions about being stabbed in the back and learning who truly supports you. One post was just a selfie with the caption, "Some people never deserved you to begin with." Another was a long paragraph about watching people you love betray you and realizing they were never really on your side. He never mentioned Jane's name, but everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. Then he started calling her. At first, Jane ignored it. She didn't want to deal with him anymore, but he kept trying. Late night calls, missed FaceTime requests, voicemails that just sounded like forced crying. Then he sent her an email. He wrote about how he was willing to work things out, but only if she apologized and distanced herself from her family. He made it clear that I was a major issue. He blamed me for ruining things and insisted that if Jane ever wanted a future with him, she needed to cut off the people who poisoned their relationship. That was the final straw. Jane blocked him on everything. No hesitation this time. No second guessing. She went through her phone and made sure he had no way to contact her again. Then we started hearing rumors. Apparently, Evan was considering suing Jane for emotional distress. A cousin heard from someone in Evan's circle that he had been talking about legal action. He was claiming that Jane had blindsided him by canceling the wedding and that he deserved compensation for the pain and embarrassment she caused him. It didn't go anywhere, but the fact that he was even thinking about it was insane. Meanwhile, mutual friends started taking sides. At first, some of them had tried to stay neutral, but once Jane finally opened up about everything that had happened, the NBA, the insane costs, the way Evan treated her, people started unfollowing him. A few even reached out to say they had no idea how bad it had gotten. Then Evan's family tried to drag my parents into it. Apparently, they expected Jane's family to cover part of the wedding expenses since it was her fault the wedding got cancelled. My parents laughed that off immediately. They weren't paying a dime for a wedding that never even happened. Then came the fight over the engagement ring. Jane asked for it back. Evan refused. He claimed it was a gift and that he had every right to keep it. That's when Jane finally decided to consult a lawyer. She wasn't even sure if she wanted the ring back. She just didn't want him to keep it out of spite. The lawyer told her it depended on whether it was considered a gift or a conditional agreement. Basically, if it was given with the expectation of marriage, then legally, Jane might have a right to get it back. But if it was considered an unconditional gift, Evan could keep it. No official legal action was taken, but the fact that Jane even had to consider getting a lawyer for this was ridiculous. Then Evan sunk even lower. He started DMing members of our family. He told them Jane was weak, that she had let her family control her, that she had never really loved him. He was trying to turn people against her, but by this point, almost everyone knew the truth. Then a cousin leaked screenshots from the wedding group chat. The messages were bad. Evan had called Jane pathetic for listening to her family. He had mocked her for needing her mommy and daddy's approval. He had even joked about how he was only marrying her because she would do whatever he wanted. When Jane saw the messages, she didn't say anything. She just stared at the screen for a long time. For the first time, she looked like she truly understood who she had been engaged to. But even after everything, she still struggled with guilt. She started wondering if she should have handled things differently. If she had stood up for herself sooner, maybe it wouldn't have gotten this bad. Maybe she wouldn't have let it get this far. But then something changed. People started unfollowing Evan in droves. He lost a ton of social media followers. The vague posts, the passive-aggressive comments, the constant victim act, people were over it. Mutual friends stopped responding to him. Groomsmen who had once backed him up were now completely ignoring him. Then one night, Jane told me something I never expected to hear. I feel relieved. After weeks of chaos, she finally realized that she had dodged a bullet. Evan's final move was his most dramatic yet. He posted a long unhinged rant about how some people will let their families sabotage true love because they're too weak to think for themselves. He disabled comments so no one could call him out. Then the next day, he deleted it. That was the last thing he ever posted about Jane. About a month after the wedding was officially cancelled, Evan went completely silent. No cryptic posts, no dramatic rants, nothing. For someone who had been airing his grievances nonstop, it was weird. Then one day, a cousin sent me a screenshot from Instagram. Evan had moved on fast. He had posted a new picture, a fancy dinner, candlelight, a caption about finding happiness after heartbreak, and sitting across from him, a new girl. Jane saw it too. She didn't say much, just kind of stared at the screen for a moment. She admitted it felt weird, but for the first time in forever, she wasn't angry. She just shrugged and said, "At least I don't have to deal with him anymore." But Evan wasn't done rewriting the narrative. His posts started shifting. Suddenly, he wasn't the heartbroken victim anymore. He was thriving. He was talking about real love, new beginnings, and escaping toxic relationships. It was clear what he was trying to do: flip the story. Then someone in the family recognized the girl. She wasn't just some random rebound. She was one of Jane's old co-workers, someone Evan had met before while he and Jane were still together. And just like that, the theory started flying. Had he already been talking to this girl before the wedding was called off? Had he lined up his next relationship before Jane even left? The timeline wasn't adding up, and people started putting the pieces together. Then Jane admitted something. The last few months with Evan, he had been acting distant. There were nights where he'd suddenly be busy, where he wouldn't text back for hours. She had brushed it off as wedding stress, but now she wasn't so sure. A few days later, I got a message from an unexpected source, one of Evan's ex-groomsmen. He had stopped talking to Evan after all the wedding drama, and now that everything had settled, he wanted to share something. Apparently, Evan had been talking to the new girl months before the wedding. It wasn't physical as far as he knew, but Evan had been texting her a lot. He had even mentioned how he felt a connection with her, but brushed it off because he was about to get married anyway. Jane took it surprisingly well. After sitting with it for a while, she just let out a deep breath and said, "You know what? I don't even care anymore." For the first time, she felt free. No more doubts. No more wondering if she should have handled things differently. She finally understood. Evan was never truly loyal. He was always looking for something better. Then 3 months after what was supposed to be their wedding day, Evan dropped the biggest bombshell yet. He announced his engagement to the same girl. Looking back though, the signs had been there. He had been distant toward the end of his relationship with Jane, always busy texting someone late at night, disappearing for hours at a time. At the time, Jane had brushed it off as wedding stress. Now it was clear he had already been checked out before the wedding was even called off. People lost their minds. The same followers who had sympathized with his breakup posts started questioning the timeline. Comments were filled with people asking how he had gone from heartbreak to engagement so fast. Jane saw the post, and for the first time in this entire mess, she laughed, a real genuine laugh. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. She just found it hilarious. The best part, by then, she had started rebuilding her life. She had moved out of our parents' house and into her own place. She was going out with friends again. She had even gotten a promotion at work, something that never would have happened if she had still been stuck in wedding planning chaos with Evan. Therapy was paying off too. She had stopped blaming herself for everything. She understood now that it wasn't about her not being enough. Evan was always going to be like this. He just wanted control. And then just when we thought he was finally gone for good, Evan reached out one last time. He sent Jane a long message claiming she never deserved him, that he had found a real woman, and that she would never be happy without him. Jane didn't even respond. She laughed, blocked him, and moved on for good. It's been a year since Jane called off the wedding. And honestly, I've never seen her doing this well. She's in a new relationship now, and this time it's actually healthy. No weird ultimatums, no controlling behavior, no endless drama. Her boyfriend is kind, supportive, and most importantly, he treats her like an equal. From what I've seen, they actually talk things out, make decisions together, and get this, he encourages her to have a life outside of their relationship. Basically, the exact opposite of Evan. Meanwhile, Evan's whirlwind engagement, it imploded. I found out through mutual friends that he and his new fiancé didn't even make it 6 months. No fancy wedding, no over-the-top destination event, just a messy breakup. And the best part, his ex spoke out. One of my cousins who still follows Evan's former groomsmen told me that the girl finally realized who she was dealing with. According to what she told her friends, Evan was sweet and fun at first, but the moment things got serious, he turned into a completely different person. He demanded control over everything. He made strict rules about what she could and couldn't post online. He expected her to pay for everything while constantly complaining that she wasn't doing enough. It didn't take long for her to see the red flags. And once she called him out on his behavior, he lost it. The breakup wasn't pretty. She left him, and Evan tried everything to keep her. But unlike Jane, she wasn't as easily manipulated. Once she was done, she was done. Then out of nowhere, Evan tried to come back. Jane woke up one morning to a long message from an unknown number. It was Evan. She didn't even read it. She saw his name, sighed, and deleted it. Then she blocked the number. That was it. No curiosity. No second thoughts. She was finally over it. Meanwhile, Jane's career has skyrocketed. Without Evan holding her back, she's been killing it at work. She got a promotion 6 months ago, and her boss has already hinted that she's in line for an even bigger role soon. Turns out, when you're not being drained by constant drama, you actually have time to focus on things that matter. And my parents, they finally admitted that they should have spoken up sooner. They told Jane they were sorry for not saying anything when they saw how controlling Evan was. At the time, they just wanted to support her. But looking back, they realized they should have warned her. Now they're just happy to have their daughter back. As for Evan, his fake influencer persona is starting to crumble. People see through him now. He still posts about self-growth and thriving after heartbreak, but the engagement scandal definitely hurt his reputation. A lot of his old followers unfollowed him after seeing how quickly he moved on and how fast it all fell apart. Every once in a while, someone will send me screenshots of his random posts that seem clearly aimed at Jane, the most recent one. Some people never change. Glad I dodged that bullet. Sure, Evan. Whatever helps you sleep at night. Meanwhile, in our family, the whole thing has basically turned into a running joke. Whenever we see something expensive or over the top, someone will say, "Hey, should we make it a mandatory wedding experience package?" Or if anyone starts over explaining something, we'll say, "Sign the NDA first." Even Jane laughs about it now. A few months ago, we took a sibling trip together. Just the two of us. First time in years, we actually hung out like that. No tension. No Evan drama. Just us being sisters again. And, honestly, that's the best part of all of this. Evan tried to break Jane. He tried to isolate her, control her, and make her feel like she needed him. But in the end, he's the one who lost. Jane got her life back. She got her family back, and now she's happier than she's ever been. Sometimes dodging a wedding invite is the best decision you'll ever make. You said a few months after Evan's whirlwind engagement collapsed, he started reinventing himself. His social media was suddenly filled with posts about self-growth and escaping toxicity. He branded himself as a self-love influencer, constantly talking about how he had healed from the past and learned to thrive alone. The irony, he was clearly still bitter. Every few weeks, he'd drop a not-so-subtle jab about people who let their families ruin their lives or weak women who can't think for themselves. The captions were different, but the message was always the same. He was still obsessed with Jane. Then, out of nowhere, Jane got an email. It was from Evan. It was long and dramatic. He claimed he had matured and wanted to have a real conversation to clear the air. He said he had moved on but wanted closure so they could both heal properly. Jane showed me the email, and we both just stared at the screen. At this point, everyone told her to ignore it. My parents, mutual friends, even Jane's boyfriend said it wasn't worth it. But I could tell there was a part of her that was curious. Not because she wanted to get back in touch that ship had sailed, but because she wanted to know what his angle was. Then a mutual friend dropped some major tea. Apparently, Evan's influencer career had taken a major hit. The wedding fallout had hurt his reputation. Brands were wary of working with someone who had been publicly tied to such a messy situation. Sponsorship deals slowed down, and with all the money he and his family had poured into the wedding, he was struggling to keep up his lifestyle. The wedding vendors he and his family had stiffed, some of them were still trying to take legal action. His social media presence was shrinking fast. The engagement fallout had ruined his credibility. People didn't trust him anymore. Brands had stopped reaching out, and his sponsored posts had dried up. He wasn't just looking for closure. He was looking for a lifeline. Then we found out his real plan. One of my cousins, who still had mutual friends with Evan, did some digging. Turns out, Evan was trying to launch a podcast about overcoming heartbreak and moving forward after betrayal, and he wanted Jane to be part of it. He wasn't reaching out to heal. He was trying to use her for content. Jane finally read the email in full, and it was exactly what we expected: manipulative, vague, and full of guilt-tripping language. It wasn't a real apology. It was him trying to rewrite the story again, this time with him in control of the narrative. Jane didn't respond. She didn't tell him off. She didn't argue. She didn't give him the attention he desperately wanted. She just let him stew in silence. Then Evan did what he always does when he doesn't get his way. He had a meltdown online. He posted a long dramatic rant about how some people can't handle the truth and are too weak to face their past mistakes. It stayed up for a few hours before he deleted it. But by then, enough people had seen it, and the general reaction, no one cared anymore. People were tired of his drama, and then we heard the final piece of karma. Evan had to move back in with his parents. His financial troubles had finally caught up to him, and without the influencer income he had relied on, he couldn't keep up with his lifestyle. Meanwhile, Jane's life, the complete opposite. She was thriving. She and her boyfriend were planning a big vacation together, something she never would have been able to do if she had married Evan. Her job was going better than ever, and for the first time in years, she actually felt like her own person. Evan, however, was still trying to stir the pot. He started reaching out to mutual friends, hoping someone would convince Jane to talk to him. Nobody took the bait. Then the ultimate irony, one of the cousins who leaked Evan's wedding group chat rants got invited to an event where Evan was. Instead of confronting them, Evan pretended they had never met, just acted like none of it had ever happened. At this point, Jane finally admitted she didn't feel any anger toward him anymore, just relief. She dodged a bullet, and now she was finally free. Looking back, it's crazy to think that this all started with a ridiculous wedding invitation. But in the end, it turned into something much bigger, something that saved Jane from the worst decision of her life. A few nights ago, we were all at a family gathering, and someone made a joke about the wedding that never was. Jane just raised her glass and said, "Best thing that ever happened to me." And, honestly, she's right.